recording now.
Morning, everyone. Hello, Patricia.
Hi. Hello.
Hello. I have decided today that it would be a very good thing for myself and for Patricia, but actually for the world at large, to hear a bit more about Patricia's wonderful book, The Scar That Won't Heal. And the reason why I want to do this right now is not only because the book is so good, but also because Patricia has recorded an audio book, which I'm also listening to and have listened to and more than once now. And it's so fascinating and reminded me of things that I read in the book, and also made me think about them strangely in a different way when I've heard you saying it, Patricia. So there's something very compelling about the way you've recorded the book. And I have to say, I listen to a lot of recorded books for my work and for fun, and yours is really excellent, just so well done. So I've really enjoyed listening to it again. What Patricia's done here is describe her early life, but with a meaning, so that not just talking about life, which you've done so candidly, but also we can feel ourselves being drawn into your world, and then so neatly drawn into the science, which is the next part of the book. And I found that really compelling and lovely to do, sort of be with you whilst you're doing that. So thanks ever so much for that. I've got all kinds of sort of questions and comments, and I want to ask Patricia for her take on certain things. One of the things that I felt that stood out in terms of this being a groundbreaking book was that you make a really strong case for the absolute necessity of ending the separation of mind and body in our approaches to health and well-being. And I think you did that in a really interesting way throughout the book, actually. I'm not suggesting it's your main theme, but that's what really I got from it, was this need to, we've got to stop, haven't we, thinking in that way. And your book really just draws us into a world where it is actually all one. But how it's all one and why it's all one is really important. Yeah. So we've got to work on biochemical messengers, interacting systems, the ancient mitochondria, and all of this to explain energy and the causes of the symptoms of some of the chronic fatigue type illnesses and other chronic illness. So first of all, Patricia, thanks for joining me, because this is really a great honour to do this.
Yeah, very welcome.
Obviously, you don't detail every aspect of your childhood and your young life, but you do honestly and openly share your experiences, and it's of great value to listeners and to readers, because it makes a story a meaning behind the science that you then present. How did it feel for you describing your own life, your young life?
Well, first of all, it wasn't intended to be a book about me. And the original idea I had, which was going to be, ironically, part of the Mind Body series, because that is my sort of theme, if you like. But as I was writing it, and I had this very strong idea of what it was going to be, a book came out by Dr. or Professor Bessel van der Kolk, and it was called The Body Keeps the Score. And there it was, the book that I thought I was going to write, the one that detailed not only what happens in the mind and the body to affect disease or health, and then how to deal with it. And it was like, oh, now what am I going to do? Because the book's been written. And I was a bit disheartened, but then I thought, I have to just make mine different. I just have to find a new angle. And someone said to me, why don't you put your story in it? Because that's basically why you came to understand this stuff. It's the basis of why you believe what you do and why you're now studying what you are. And I thought, yes, I could do that, I guess. I had no idea. I set out to write it from, my birth, the little I know about my birth and growing up, what it felt like. But it was very cathartic, actually, to write. It was quite difficult because I had to say some things about my parents that, one of them is still alive, that are difficult, because our experience, we have to own our experience. And if we find that our childhood is less than nurturing or less than perfect for us, we have to own that. We have to say it and have that supported and heard. But I didn't want to sort of get into blame and saying, you know, my parents were terrible people, because they weren't. They did the best they could with what they had. So it was a difficult balance to strike, actually, to talk about what it was like growing up as me in a sensitive frame, because I'm a highly sensitive person who takes criticism very deeply, and always felt wrong in my body, always felt wrong, the wrong, I don't know, personality style. Somehow I just didn't feel comfortable in my own skin for as long as I can remember. Not until I finally found myself at about 21, 22. And then it was like coming home, and it was extraordinary. But I had to physically leave home to do that. And so there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of separation, there's a lot of anxiety, which I had to talk about, because it's part of what made me me, and it's led me into doing this work that I do. So it was not as easy as I'd thought. Sure.
Yeah, I could sort of feel that in a sense.
Yeah.
You went on to talk about the effects of emotion on the mind and body. And you talk about pathways, you know, the heart to the brain, which, you know, I find that so fascinating, especially when we know now that there are, you know, more pathways, if you like, more information going in that direction, heart to brain, than the other way around. And but you also explain the significance of the gut, and in particular the bacteria who share our bodies. And you mentioned about how the bacteria, I loved one bit, I wrote it down actually, because you said how the gut bacteria keep us alert and they help us to sleep. So I found that really an interesting idea. Can you remind me of what you said on that?
So there's the whole piece around us not being just a singular I, you know. We tend to think of ourselves as this human being that's one thing, separate from you, separate from everyone else. And actually we are a we. We are a community of organisms that live in and on us, millions of them, trillions of them, not just in the gut, interestingly, but on our skin, in our hair, the inside of our mouth, some of the unmentionable places. So basically, we are in constant communication with those microbes. We evolve with them. You know, we think, at the top of the evolutionary ladder, but we evolve within this ecosystem that we are part of, that we keep forgetting that we're part of, hence we're destroying it. But when we seek to understand it, and it's a really new understanding, this, I think in the last 5-10 years, we've come to realize that the bugs that live in and on us are not just bad bugs or good bugs, because that's the simplistic version, you know, and you eat good bugs to try and improve your gut. Actually, the microbes that live in and on us, this community of organisms, are in constant communication with our organ systems in many different ways, both via the nerve pathways. The vagus nerve in particular is a very important nerve that travels the length of the body from the brain through the heart, lungs, gut, kidneys. Just about every organ system in the body is linked by this vagus nerve. And vagus, by the way, means wanderer, so it's just the name's given to it because it goes everywhere. And microbes are actually able to communicate with that nerve in many different ways. There is some evidence that they're able to travel up and down the nerve. We used to think the brain was sterile, but we now know it isn't. So it has its own community. They're also able to excrete certain products, short-chain fatty acids from the fibre that they help us digest. And these short-chain fatty acids are not just chemical breakdown products of our food, they're also messenger molecules, and they affect changes throughout the body. And then there's the neuropeptides, which are little tiny proteins that basically the bugs interact with. And if we're happy or sad, our bugs know. And not only that, but they can help us create happiness or sadness, depression or excitement. And their composition changes. The balance of the microbes changes depending on how we're feeling and what kind of life we're living, and whether we're in harmony with ourselves and our relationships, and we have meaning and purpose and all these things that I think you and I have talked about before. So there's this incredible dialogue going on all the time between you and your gut, but also you and all the other parts of your body. And most of the information, about 80%, is from body to brain and not the other way around. And this is a revolutionary understanding. We used to think the brain was the control center and just dictated what happened and told us everything we needed to do and be. And actually, our gut signals, if you like, are really integral to how we feel. So if you're feeling anxious, for instance, your breathing will be tight, your gut will be constricted because it's being downregulated. Digestion isn't needed when you are in a fight and flight situation. So it's part and parcel of this communication system. Once we know this, we can intervene in different ways. We can change the gut flora physically through eating different foods, variety of foods, seasonal foods, fermented foods if we're able to tolerate them. But we can also change our stress responses and rewire ourselves, if you like, so that our bugs can then live more harmoniously with us. So it's like, I think of it as an inner ecosystem. And we need to garden our inner ecosystem as much as we do our outer ecosystem. And we're failing at both, actually.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it, because I must admit, one of the things I've been looking at so much recently is this idea that we can't, eat ourselves out of poor exercise, and we can't exercise ourselves out of a bad diet. In other words, it's all, this integrative life that we have is, us and our cells and our bacteria and our environment and our life choices and our, choices for the future and our way of thinking about the past. I mean, all of that makes us who we are right now, doesn't it? And in your talk about the childhood, your childhood and the effect of everybody's childhood, I think that, what comes out of that so strongly is the experiences and beliefs of that come from that early life actually have lifelong effects, don't they?
So remember that the brain is immature. As human children, we are still growing, and the brain is at its most profoundly growing between the years of 0 to 2. There are other spurts around 7 and 8, and then again at puberty. But basically, therefore, we are environmentally influenced. How our brain develops is influenced very dramatically by the environment it is in. Now, this is not true of all species, because most of their brain development occurs during pregnancy. So it's a uniquely human proposition that we have here, that the life we live as children actually dictates how our brains function and work and interact with our environment. And so a childhood that is less than perfect, and to be fair, there aren't many perfect childhoods now, but if we are looking back in time, the most perfect childhood would be, barring being eaten, the Paleolithic life, the hunter-gatherer style, where you lived in a tribe, where children were raised by more than one couple, by multiple adults of multiple ages, with security and safety, kind of emotional safety, I mean. Obviously, as I've said, there were multiple physical threats, but that the community would build that child's brain as a joint enterprise. And what we have today is very much a fragmented, alienated, disparate society where many parents are very, very stressed. And so when they are trying to raise their children and doing the best they can, this isn't about blame. It's just about noticing that a lot of children grow up with beliefs that are dictated by the environment of a stressed culture and a stressed parental input. So a mother who can't connect with her child because she's working long hours to try and keep the family, provided for, and she comes home and she's got to somehow be fun mum and she's exhausted, or a dad similarly who's, also working, trying to be good parent to his child, but, has very little time. the messages that conveys to a child is their emotional life is not supported, is not important, because they will have very strong emotions between the ages of 0 and 2. It is the time when you are gut instinct, because you have very little cortical involvement at that point. Your brain is still immature. So you're not thinking rationally. You're just hungry, tired, angry, happy. You are whatever your gut tells you, whatever your sort of inner sensations are. And the point of parental support at that point is to hold those emotions as valid, respond to them, so the child learns that their feelings are important, and they will get resolution. They will be able to express themselves and be safe emotionally in that context. And this is, I think, where a lot of failures are occurring, not just years 0 to 2, but then when they go to school, and then they're influenced by their peers, and they start to individuate and become separate people. And what's happening now, we're losing parochial support within schools. So we have stressed teachers being examined. The schools are examined all the time. SATs are, this culture of measurement and exam stress. So schools are now in the business of inculcating stress. So the beliefs you're now getting are, not only is my home life not supportive in the way I need, but the school doesn't care either. And so the child has 3 options: that they can disconnect completely, which is what happens in some children, a dissociative response. I can run, or I can fight, and you see that with a lot of children. They just get really anxious, or they get really aggressive. Or they can seek help. And ideally, that's the belief we would want, that my feelings are valid, and if I am distressed, I can get help and get support. But that is happening less and less. And so this social engagement top level, the seeking help, the being supported, is not happening. And beliefs, therefore, of a child around that are: I must be bad, I am wrong, I'm not enough, and I'm not lovable. And they are deep, deep feelings. And this is, I guess, what I was trying to bring out from my childhood. They're not rational feelings. They're not intellectual feelings. They're deeply felt gut feelings about your worthlessness or validity in this life, brought about by this disconnect between you and your environment.
And even just from that perspective, that makes so much sense, doesn't it, of what you say much later in the book, which we could perhaps look at another time, but about the need to use the body, to be working via the body and with the body when we're helping an adult, because there's no doubt at all that those deep feelings, they're in the body, and they're not just a thought we have, which I think is how it used to be. That idea that if we just talk about it and we bring those thoughts out and we talk about them, that somehow or other it's all going to be fine. And of course, many of us experience ourselves, but also, for us who are practitioners, we've seen that again and again in clients, that isn't that isn't necessarily the answer. For some people, it helps a lot to talk and to discuss those thoughts, but actually in terms of healing and feeling better and being able to move into a healthier, happier life, that most of the time, in my experience, certainly isn't enough. And we do need to have that other approach, or a joint approach of mind, body being the same thing. So we will go on and have a look at that, but that's explained so well why that's absolutely necessary and the way to go forward. You talked about the survival response and the degree of that threat we perceive, and I thought that was just so vital for us to understand that when we're talking about a lot of, you've talked about in the book, is about trauma. And it's the fact that I think for many people, myself included, over the years, we saw trauma as something that happened to other people, that were terrible events or terrorist events that had a terrible effect on someone's life. And we saw those traumas as what you'd call, I think, and other people do now, the big T traumas. But you bring out, to our notice, really, the importance of the little T traumas. Could you perhaps just give a little explanation of the difference of those two?
Yeah, so the working title for my book, before I really fixed on The Scar That Won't Heal, was Everyday Trauma, right? It was just a sort of like, because what I wanted, the thesis that I'm putting across, really, the idea is that traumas are not necessarily those big things, those one-off incidents like bombing or fire or being arrested and tried. They are the cumulative small events that happen throughout childhood that give a picture to the child. You know, our brain is trying to make sense of our world. And for me, it was things like my dad being ill. Okay, so my dad was never, from about the age of 9 or 10, he started to get quite seriously ill. I mean, it was terminal effectively, but it took a long time. And a child of that age has no concept. Nobody around them has, none of my friends had parents who were dying. So there was no like context for that. So I had to make meaning and sense of it. And I think what I did was I built up this picture, dad is ill, mum is anxious about that. We don't know how things are going to work out. This must be something to do with me. I am not working hard enough. I'm not fixing it, and I need to fix it, So it's not what happens, it's the interpretation and meaning you make of it. And, it might have been another child, or even, let's take a good example, my brother, who was a bit older, and so his context was different. The meaning he made was, dad's ill, but it's not my fault, whereas for me, it was something I took on personally. The meaning and interpretation I took on was that I needed to fix it. And of course, that's impossible for a child, and it's impossible actually for most medical people, adults, to fix what he had. So actually, it's the cumulative small events that have a meaning to that person that constitute trauma, and that can be different for everyone. And so it's an individual interpretation. And I was listening to something this morning about a woman who'd had difficult experiences in the dark when she went through her childhood, and now she has been terrified of the dark because that becomes a trigger. And so these little things may seem innocuous at the time, but if the meaning we make of them is that we are emotionally unsafe, our survival brainstem, emotional brain kicks in to give us an interpretation that there is danger out there, and it will trigger a whole set of physiological responses. They're in the body. That's why we need to talk to the body, by the way. And so we are at the mercy of hardwired physiological mechanisms that are there to conserve our life at all costs. So it's a survival response. It's hardwired, it's innate, and it becomes very dysfunctional if you carry those responses through into your adult life, as I did. And then when my first relationship breaks down at age 29, I am all over the place. Because for me, it's my responsibility to keep that relationship going, because that's what I learned in my childhood. And my dad died, and I didn't mourn him properly because the timing was just wrong and I didn't know what to do. And then my relationship broke down, and then I was in full mourning for every loss. And I went a bit depressed, and I really lost it. I had a breakdown. So it's profound, actually, these cumulative small t events, and they are the ones I come across in my clinic more often. I'm sure you do. It's not the big events so much.
No, and in fact, I think it is everyone. I think that's probably what we're having to understand, isn't it, with this whole new paradigm. In a sense, it has been a paradigm shift in how we look at health, hasn't it? That everyone we speak to, we can come across these small t traumas, and they are often things. I know for example, my dad worked 24-hour shifts up on the mountains. A lovely job for him. He loved being on his own up at a radio station up in the Pennines, but he had migraine every time he was off. So we had to be quiet. We had to be silent in the house because he needed to rest, and he couldn't stand any noise. And so we learned that when dad was at home, we didn't have a lot of fun with dad because he had migraine. And I've realized, again, when you talked about the difference between, for example, yourself and your brother, which is partly to do with age and partly to do with, you know, the different personalities and your different makeup. And I think, you know, we'll talk another time, and we already have a bit about HSPs, highly sensitive people. And I think my understanding as I grew older, and certainly the last few years, to really understand what that means, that I wasn't just some weird person who was somehow super delicate or something, but I actually was one of a group of around about 20% of the population who is like that. And therefore the response that I will have had as a child to my dad having migraine and us having to be quiet was quite different to my 4 brothers and sisters. So that I, you know, in my system, it was about having to be good and having to look after the world so that he would be all right. So instead of the child being looked after and, you know, being listened to, you know, whatever was going on for me, I'm surmising, but, you know, wasn't going to be listened to, because I was determined that I would have to keep quiet and small and out of the way in a way. And therefore, you know, and I know we have mentioned before, I won't go into it now, but we've talked about one of my deep beliefs, which I cleared, was, you know, as an adult, was about being a nuisance. And this is, you know, makes me realize more and more how it wasn't just about being a nuisance because my big brothers wouldn't want me running around with them, but actually just making a noise, not even being able to make a noise or ask a question or want something from my parents because dad needed to have that time in the bedroom in the dark. And, you know, of course, that, as you say, that's in the body. It's not something, you know, I could easily say, well, that's, you know, that doesn't matter. Of course, it was just because he wasn't well. And I was a happy child. But of course, the happy child enables herself to be happy on the surface in a way by saying, if I do this, everything's all right. And then that is what's saved in the body, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's a coping mechanism. It's a strategy that you develop in order to survive.
That's what I think is really important here. And I like the way you put that. It's the fact that it isn't just a minor thing. This is actually a survival mechanism.
Yeah. It's a really tough one to break by thinking. Doesn't really, you can tell yourself all you like, I shouldn't think that way, I should be more positive, I can ask questions, it's okay. But when push comes to shove in an emotionally charged situation, your brain will revert to what it knows. It's a pattern matching. It will say, when this happens, do this. It's a memo. It's just like, do this. And your prefrontal cortex, which would normally give you that oversight, that witnessing presence, that hang on a minute, do I really need to react this way, goes offline. It's just like, I'm out of here because this is a threat situation. And so what you will do is refer back to the past and act in the way you always have. And that's where I was at, you know, be nice, be pleasant to people, be liked, do what everyone says, be a good girl, all of those things. And that didn't help me in the relationship that I was in, where being good didn't work. What was needed was authenticity. To speak my truth and say, I need this, and what are we going to do about it? And equally to hear the other person say, these are my needs, and how are we going to meet those? So I just was a people pleaser, and through, and it actually was hard work, and it didn't get me what I needed. So I've had to break that habit, but it's been a long journey to kind of realize that we can change our brain when we use these tools that use the body responses and help us reconnect again to our inner experience, because that's what a lot of us have lost.
Yes, that's so true. And I think we need to come to an end here. But what I'd like to just mention, and we don't need to go into any depth on this, but just to say to people who might listen to this, that you talk about the triune brain, which you explain so well in the book. And that will be a very good place for people to really look at this, what's going on in the brain, you know, the sort of the science, if you like, the physiology as well of these 3 parts of the brain. And like you said, this bit that we think is in charge just actually is kind of just basically switched off or ignored or not even there at certain times because of all of this. So I recommend people have a look at that in your book because it's so well described. So would you like to come up? Can we do some more of this, Patricia? Because we've only got a small way through your book.
No, we could. I'd love to.
More issues and more ideas that you have in a future conversation. So
perfect. Look forward to it.
Thanks ever so much for today then. That's been really brilliant.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.